Ghislaine's original rise, people don't know this, but in the first few chapters of Whitney Webb's excellent book, points out that Ghislaine and her sister were actually key people developing search engines, particularly Magellan, which was on the front page of Netscape Navigator, and they sold that to a company for $18 million, and that's how they met Bill Gates in the 1990s through Ghislaine. So Ghislaine knew Bill Gates a long time ago, back in the 1990s, and that's how they forged that relationship where they wanted to be involved in the cutting-edge sectors like tech, but also in the cutting-edge sectors of inside information to game the stock market and to profit from war and people displacement. Did you see the Thai email which said, hey, Jeff, check out Thailand because there's this displacement and there's 1 million children that can be tapped into? Yeah, I've spent 12 hours straight live streaming on my channel on YouTube, Jay Dyer. You can go watch all those. And we started with it. I didn't really realize it was going to be this massive, but this is probably the biggest crop of news information breaking stuff that in my lifetime. I mean, this rivals maybe JFK assassination. It's up there with the Big 9 event. This is up there with COVID. And all of those events actually will tie into the massive information dump that we just had. So I think the real way to understand this is that it really demonstrates and vindicates what those of us on this side of the media, critical of the mainstream establishment and mainstream media, have said all along, which is that the world is actually run by interlocking networks and cliques of intelligence agencies, government operatives, academics, celebrities, bankers, corporate heads. They all work together, and they have a shadow system that they run kind of on the background or in the background that is really pulling the strings when it comes to what people think is the political public sphere of things. So we have basically high-level compromise, blackmail, espionage, snuff films, everything you could think of that's the worst possible stuff. Think of Nick Cage's 8mm. It's that, but blown up to the level of True Detective Season 1 on an international scale. So the most shocking thing, I think, is not just the salacious kind of, legitimate stuff with underage people. That's all awful. That's terrible. But that we're actually seeing that Jeffrey Epstein seems to be a literal Bond villain. Right. A Bond villain perhaps above the level of a Klaus Schwab. This is so massive. You've got Epstein being able basically to meet with the heads of world governments. He's basically a consultant fixer at a high financial level and a blackmailer and an intelligence operative, liaisoning with multiple agencies across the world, heads of state, kings. We got Thailand, we've got Ukraine, we've got Israel, we've got all of it implicated here in a massive global cover-up for, as just broke a few minutes ago, in fact, total world control. In fact, there's an email where there's discussion back and forth, and Epstein is basically saying, we don't really have to worry. We've got it all under total control. And that's our trump card, he says. We've got it total control. And then he says, we can wreck economies and profit from those collapses. And he says, you recognize, to Peter Thiel, I represent the Rothschilds. And then we have those exchanges between him and Ariana de Rothschild saying, we can actually look at this collapse and this chaos in the Ukraine, and we can go in and buy it up. Go back to the bailouts of Europe. We can buy up those countries after they collapse, and we can manipulate and weaponize the Federal Reserve and the International Federal Reserve System through usury, debt banking, and enslavement by design. And he says, and we will throw all of that debt and that chaos onto the goy, and we will make that money on the downside, on the downturn, and we can dupe everybody.
It's exactly what we've been saying. It's just from the mouth of the perpetrators. An appropriate intro for us this hour. Jay Dyer is my guest. Follow him on X at J_D007, on YouTube at youtube.com/@JDyer, and JaysAnalysis.com. Experience, I think, is what sets people like you apart, Jay. A lot of people are sort of understanding this, coming to these realizations right now. I've been saying for a while, it's like we've always seen the black and white picture. Now it's being colored in. Now we're seeing the details and maybe the names and dates that we could speculate on. Now we're getting it from their own words. And as you point out, I mean, the way that you describe, what we're learning from the emails, it just sounds like what Alex Jones and yourself and so many people have said over the decades. Now it's just coming from the perpetrators, from the people actually doing it and engaged in it. So it tastes a little different. It feels a little different when it's coming from them. And so I want to talk about sort of the biggest bombshell revelations that you found or that you have drawn your attention, but also the reaction especially from Donald Trump, and trying to figure out what the hell's going on there. But yeah, what has been something that has either surprised you or blown your mind or vindicated something that you believed already?
Well, I first learned about the Rothschild banking system and how that network worked probably in about 2005 or six, and I started writing some essays back then, some blog posts, and WordPress blog, all that kind of stuff back in the early days of blogging, and that eventually turned into a chapter in my first book. So it's actually 10 years ago. This is 2016, 10-year anniversary. The very first chapter in my book is about how you see right there the Rothschild masked ball, where presumably there was all kinds of orgiastic, eyes wide shut type stuff going on. And then I noted that quite a few Hollywood films have actually been telling us that. And you'll see there to the left, both Eyes Wide Shut and The Ninth Gate with Johnny Depp, which have very similar themes of these kind of high profile networks, cults, Rothschild mansions, et cetera, all of that in the films, throwing it in our face kind of in an eyes wide shut way. So that's why I always thought that movie was so important. And, here we are years later, and this is all coming out, and it's exactly what we said and way more. I think you're absolutely right, Harrison, to talk about the things that are really surprising. One of the things that comes to mind that was kind of surprising, even though I guess it really shouldn't surprise me, was Jeff Stein McCaffrey's interest in DNA, genetics, and blood transfusions, and studying blood, trying to find out the history of people in terms of their genetics, looking into Asperger's and perhaps the aberrations that might come out of a person who was sexually traumatized that could perhaps be weaponized into some kind of, quote, superpower. So I'm not going full on like literal X-Men stuff, but kind of almost like that, where you have this idea that trauma-based mind control, particularly sexual abuse, might cause a person to dissociate and create alternate personalities and perhaps be trained. We have one email that was really shocking where an Asian person is of some sort is emailing Epstein. He says that I found a sexually abused girl and she's in stage 3 of the process, and she seems to be developing her own techniques, skills, and abilities. Now that could mean sexual entrapment, blackmail techniques like you see in the movie Red Sparrow or something like that. We know the NKVD was very adept at training girls for that, but we also, I think, have other nation states that are involved in sexual entrapment. Of course, Israel would be no stranger to that. The Japanese, the Chinese, they've all engaged in sexual entrapment research and perfecting that technique. So this appears to be an email of a spotter or recruiter saying, hey, Jeff, I found a good potential, candidate. And along that same line, we have people who were said to be, it's time to kill her. You have permission to kill this one. By the way, did you torture her? Where's the torture video? I love the torture video. All that kind of snuff, 8mm stuff is all vindicated. We knew that was all real in the sense of that it existed out there in the world. A lot of Hollywood films, a lot of movies, noir films, portray this kind of stuff. But even a few years ago, outlets like The Guardian were still saying there's no such thing as snuff films. They don't exist. They're a hoax or an internet satanic panic mystery. Well, no, it's not a hoax. It's all very real, and it's part of the blackmail stuff. In fact, there was an email that was sent to somebody asking for 1 Bitcoin when Bitcoin is around $10,000, saying, hey, by the way, I've got a bunch of video footage of Jeffrey doing stuff. Send me a Bitcoin. Yeah, there's the, hey, I love the torture video. Oh, wow. Thank you so much for sending me that, Jeff. That was, literal 8mm. So if you've never seen the Nick Cage movie, it's 8mm worth watching. But that side of it was pretty wild. The transhumanist side of it was really wild. We have, the asking for twins. There's a email where Epstein says, I wish that I could get a hold of a couple twins because I want to study the effects of different environmental settings on twins. And that includes, he says, parallel and vertical stripes, which is odd because, of course, his temple or his sauna or whatever that building is on the island with the owl, it has those horizontal stripes on it. So he seemed to be very obsessed with a lot of weird things. Now, let's not forget the Vatican also plays a role in this because he apparently, according to one of the emails in the past, spent some time, quote, living at the Vatican. We don't know how long that duration was, but it is confirmed that back in 2003, he did get a blessing and is in an old photo together with John Paul II being blessed In the email, which is in 2015, reflecting on this past event, meeting with John Paul II, there's a discussion of architecture and the procuring of certain columns. So Epstein wanted to get a hold of these things for the Pope. The Pope was interested in these various architectural objects and so forth, which is odd. Itself doesn't necessarily prove anything nefarious, but it does show a close relationship with Epstein and perhaps with Mossad. And let's keep in mind, there's books that have been out for a long time. For example, Gordon Thomas wrote a book called Gideon's Spies. It's about the history of the Mossad and their operations. He wrote that in 1999. And a lot of people took issue with the claims that Gordon Thomas made in this very well-known, very researched geopolitical analysis and historical journalist text. It's not a conspiracy text, but people took issue with him linking these people to Princess Diana. Well, turns out Epstein was linked with and had met Princess Diana. And he was very obviously close to the royals, not just Andrew. Now, if we think about the Vatican role, well, what does this have to do with the Vatican? Why would that have anything to do with compromise? Well, don't forget that that's not the only notorious PDF that John Paul II had a very close relationship with. He also had a relationship with Jimmy Savile, whom he gave a papal knighthood to. So that's multiple PDFs involved in very close relationships and getting awards from the highest level of the Roman Catholic Church. To me, that suggests compromise. He was also in some of the emails organizing flights for Pope Francis, for meetings with Pope Francis. No surprise there. But to mention that point with Gideon's Spies by Gordon Thomas, there's a chapter where he talks about the normalizing of relations between the state of Israel and the Vatican. And that's because, according to Gordon Thomas, there were Mossad operatives acting in the Vatican in the 1980s, in the 1990s, and eventually, I think it was in the 90s, that the Vatican recognized the state of Israel. And so that occurred through specifically the liaisoning and the meetings with John Paul II. Now, we don't exactly know what went on. There is an allegation in Gordon Thomas's book that they tried to bug the Vatican. I don't know if they were successful in that. I think they were. They put a stop to that. But you have to keep in mind the Vatican also has its own secret service, and so anybody who's getting close to the Pope in this way has been vetted. And the idea that, well, they didn't know what Epstein was up to, they didn't know what Jimmy Savile was up to, is utterly preposterous. Absolutely. The Vatican has a very adept secret service. So my point is that these religious leaders, it's not just heads of state, it's also the most prominent religious organization in Western civilization, the Roman Catholic Church, the papacy, which were a target, and seems to have to some degree been involved in and colluded with to some degree under Pope Francis and John Paul II, who is known, by the way, as the most Judaic of the Pope. So that's important to keep in mind, and it does vindicate a lot of what Gordon Thomas had written about in his book, which people took issue with, not just with the Pope, but also with Princess Diana. So, I mean, I don't want to take up all of your time, Harrison, but like I can go on for like ever. This is the wildest, craziest stuff we've ever seen.
Yeah, well, I completely agree. I'm right there with you. And the other thing about the Vatican that came out was that basically he was, I think he was emailing Ehud Barak, but he was emailing somebody basically giving the inside story about the resignation of Ratzinger.
Oh, the Vatican Bank. Yes.
Right, yes, and talking about the Vatican Bank, and there was a guy who basically discovered wrongdoing and was collecting evidence, and they basically killed him and got rid of his evidence, and that's all laid out. And I was wondering, okay, is this because these guys are involved in this? Is this, inside knowledge because they're actually active in these groups, or is this just, part of the allure of being a spy is having access to secret information? So I was wondering, is this, are they involved, or is this just them sort of, hey, I get to know the inside scoop. Hey, what's really going on here? Do you think it's just, the self-satisfaction of knowing secrets nobody else knows, or how involved in the Vatican Bank do you think these guys were?
No, this is a 100% absolute intimate involvement. In fact, you can go watch all my podcasts where I covered Operation Gladio from both critics and supporters of the Gladio operations during the Cold War. Gladio wasn't just stay-behind units to protect against Soviets. It was ultimately, according to Roman Catholic author and historian and FBI consultant Paul Williams, a compromising of the entire structure of the Italian government throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And this actually came out in European news. It's confirmed. It came out before they knew the name of it as Operation Gladio. But this was a Kissinger-run operation through Licio Gelli and through Michele Sindona. Gelli was the highest level Grand Orient Freemason in Italy. He was in charge of the P2 Grand Orient Lodges. This is all, by the way, publicly admitted and confirmed. You can go look it up. And he was working together with the organized crime figure Mikhail Sindona, and they were using the Banco d'Ambrosio and the Vatican Bank for these cutouts and for this money laundering to fund a lot of CIA black ops stuff. And this relationship was first formed and forged through Bill Donovan of the OSS, and then through James Jesus Angleton, the Israeliophile, of course, who worked the Rome desk for the CIA, and then through William Colby during the Cold War. Yes, exactly. Those books are 100% absolute proof of everything that we're talking about here. And what this shows is that it's not really a left-right thing. This is a higher tier level of operation that, for example, according to Gladio, the Rockefellers bailed out the Vatican Bank during this period when it collapsed, right? Both Banco d'Ambrosio and the Vatican Bank were deeply in debt. I think about $1 billion in debt at one point, because they had actually taken the people's pensions. They had stolen the pensions of everybody in Italy and were basically gambling with the pensions, and then they lost in derivatives markets and whatnot. And so that led to the bailout by the Rockefellers of the Vatican Bank. And this is in part why there's such a close relationship. Now, keep in mind, the official Vatican bankers since the 1700s have actually been the Rothschilds, and that's publicly on record at both the Jewish Encyclopedia and at the Catholic Encyclopedia. They're the official bankers of the Vatican back to the 1700s. Up into the 1800s, there's multiple bailouts, Rothschild loans to the Holy See. You can go look that up. That's all public information. Learned all about that as a historian. So the Vatican Bank angle is another reason why Epstein probably had very close relationship with John Paul II, we know, and then perhaps also with Francis, because he seems to explain to banker Larry Summers. You would think banker Larry Summers, the Harvard, Viper takeover operative who helped
Secretary
loot Russia
Treasury, right? I mean,
yeah, who helped loot Russia in the 1990s. You would think Summers would know how the Vatican Bank runs, but he actually seems to not know that there's a secretive banking operation, shadow banking, and the Vatican is one of those key banks to funnel money, hide money, et cetera, for black operations. And it's explained in detail right there. And by the way, that also lends credence to what you're talking about with John Paul I, who was killed 32 or 33 days into his papacy by the P2, most people think, or writers think, precisely because he was beginning to investigate the Vatican Bank. And that's exactly why, according to Epstein, Benedict resigned. It wasn't about, theology nerd stuff. It was actually about corruption and blackmail.
It's absolutely thrilling. Like, you talk about, the material for Hollywood level movies. I mean, that's what's being exposed here. So it's tantalizing, but as you point out, I mean, that's not the real thing about this release. It's, yes, a lot of it's scandalous, a lot of it's tantalizing. Which is more, important to you? Is it the geopolitical stuff, or is it the creep? Because I got two stories. I got from Daily Mail, Epstein linked to designer baby empire in latest files that reveal bid to engineer superhumans and clones. All right, so you have like the sci-fi cloning crap he was into. Then at the same time, you've got the post you tweeted out. We have total control, collapse economies and rule. We've got him talking about Davos being the next UN replacement. So it's like.
Right.
What do you even focus on? Do you focus on the personal, interpersonal, creepy cloning stuff? Do you focus on the manipulation of the world geopolitical machination stuff?
It's his version of full spectrum dominance, right? And so let's think about this in terms of the way that the Pentagon had that strategy of full spectrum dominance. This is the same type of strategy, but it's shadow full spectrum dominance. And this is an older strategy, again, that probably the Rothschilds, I think, kind of perfected how to do this, because they come from obviously a long line of banking elites and banking families. And the real spies are bankers. That's what we learn when we go into the history of not just the OSS, but the inquiry. Originally, the U.S. intelligence apparatus that was set up under Wilson was a bunch of bankers and academics. And that's why many OSS heads and CIA heads, like Alan Dulles, actually went to be, who was a banker, by the way, and a lawyer. They went to be heads of the Bank for National Settlements, which is the central bank of central banks. And so we also have that very fascinating email where he's discussing with Ariana de Rothschild the theory that the Rothschilds and the banking international clique had a role in perhaps helping Hitler come to power. The email actually says that when Hitler was destitute, he was helped at certain homeless shelters that he stayed in through international elite Jewish financiers, particularly the Rothschilds and others, even the Epstein family itself. So what this means is that there's a long lineage of banking intelligence that is the background to understanding this architecture. Now, not anyone else has talked about the Rakovsky interrogation, because the Rakovsky interrogation is kind of unknown about its provenance. It may or may not be accurate. There are real interrogations by the NKVD of Christian Rakovsky, who was the socialist minister of Bulgaria, who was a rabid Trotskyite. So he was arrested by Stalin's NKVD because, of course, Stalin hated the Trotskyites. And they have this really long interrogation. And Rakovsky says things to his interrogator, I think his name's Gabriel, that just blow Gabriel's mind. He says, "You don't understand who I really work for." He says, "I work for people above the capitalist-socialist Soviet dialectic."
Right.
He basically says towards the end of this long interview and interrogation, "I work for the Rothschilds." And he says, "We have certain people like me that operate at a role that you don't understand. We're international fixers." And he doesn't use the word Bond villain because that didn't exist yet, but they're essentially like Bond villains working under the families that we're talking about here, these elite families. And he says, you could look at somebody like Sidney Riley, the famous spy. He was another one of me, he says. These high-level fixer, consultant, PhD in criminal operations. Now, if you look at Gladio, and if you look at the Brazilian car wash scandal as an example, the Brazilian car wash scandal is another situation kind of like this, where the entire country was compromised from within in an elaborate scheme of money laundering and compromising essentially a giant oil company, which compromised the entire government during the 1980s and 90s. The CIA and the FBI and other entities went in and studied this and tried to, figure out what was going on. I had dinner with a person who had been involved in litigating this whole operation. And he said, when I was talking to him, I said, "This sounds like Operation Gladio." And he was kind of shocked. He said, "How did you know that? This is exactly the same structure as Gladio." Guess what? Gladio is the same structure, although 2.0, of the FTX collapse. And guess what? Epstein, as I survey this information, is basically a PhD, not so much in math or this weird scientism stuff. I think he's essentially a kind of criminal PhD, and he's not necessarily running everything. He's got people who tell him what to do. If you remember the emails about he was given orders from certain people. He was told what he has to do by certain people. But he has a lot of skills, it seems, in networking, coordinating, blackmailing, and perhaps even cataloging the data. Because if we think back to Ghislaine's original rise, people don't know this, but in the first few chapters of Whitney Webb's excellent book, One Nation Under Blackmail, Volume 2, she points out that Ghislaine and her sister were actually key people developing search engines. Did you know that? They developed some of the first search engine technology, particularly Magellan, which was on the front page of Netscape Navigator, and they sold that to a company for $18 million, and that's how they met Bill Gates in the 1990s through Ghislaine. So Ghislaine knew Bill Gates a long time ago, back in the 1990s, and that's how they forged that relationship, where they wanted to be involved in the cutting-edge sectors like tech, but also in the cutting-edge sectors of inside information to game the stock market and to profit from war and people displacement. Did you see the Thai email which said, "Hey, Jeff, check out Thailand because there's this displacement and there's 1 million children that can be tapped into."
Oh, wow. It makes sense. I mean, everything bad they benefit from. Collapse a country, you can make a little off the top. Start a war, and hey, you got a bunch of orphans to source from.
Yep.
Again, it is depths of evil that most people have not spent any time actually considering might actually exist out there. Because we tend to think that, evil people like this will be cast out of society. No, they're running it in a lot of cases. And the Rothschild connection has to be the most important. Whether you're talking about Israel or Jeff Epstein, who in these emails says in no uncertain words, "I am an agent of the Rothschilds." I mean, you can't get more clear than that. And then you look at the way that they have presided over the European continent since the early 1800s. And of course, I try to always point out, and everybody knows the story of Nathaniel Rothschild buying up the stock exchange. But the part people miss is because of his intelligence network. And it was so well established at that point, everybody looked to him to find out the results of the battle because everybody knew that he would know before anybody else. Everybody knew those guys have the better information than even the government has. And if the government's relying on you for information, that's total control. So everybody knows that.
The story is true.
Yeah.
The story is true, by the way.
It's absolutely true. And it to me, sort of represents, the beginning, a watershed moment where they go, oh, man, this control of information, our banking network in all these different countries, the communications that we have, we can take over the world with this, and that's what they've done. And Jeffrey Epstein is just the latest incarnation of this superstructure that they built over centuries.
Yeah, in the official biography of the Rothschilds that I mention quite often by a character named, I always forget this guy's name, but Frederick Morton, this is a 1952 biography here. You'll see that it's a real book. And then here on pages 48 to 49 is an actual account of what you're referring to in regard to Waterloo, that they had advanced information, and this enabled them to invest and buy up as the stock market tanked because of the advanced information. And guess what? What are we, a few hundred years later? And we have that exact same email of Jeff Stein McGeffrey saying the exact same thing, that, yeah, let's just do this. By the way, it wasn't just, the Rothschild Ariana email where they were talking about it with Ukraine and buying up things in Ukraine. There was another one where he's having a text exchange with Bannon, and he says, him, Banner, time, and then he says the Federal Reserve and inflation are weapons to be used. Yeah. So he understands even that the Federal Reserve is a weapon that can be used tactically. We've seen that, obviously, I think, in the last several years with the interest rates. Epstein even says at one point, the zero interest rates, that was a good thing. That was a good move. That works. That helps us.
And of course,
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, of course, now Trump expected to pick Kevin Warsh, son of Zionist billionaire Ron Lauder, as the Fed chair. Ron Lauder is the, in my opinion, thoroughly detestable president of the World Jewish Congress that has been demanding that we have hate speech laws for the last decade or so. And I remember since I first got into conspiracies, there was always talk around the concept of the 13 families that rule the world, and that there are these families, these bloodlines that hold a sort of shadow nobility control over the world. And that really does seem to be what the Epstein files reveal to a large degree. And it's all the powerful people here in America. It's people that got us into the war in Ukraine. I mean, these really are just a few number of families. The Rothschild, sort of the kingpin family, but they're just one of a few families that have operated this, I don't know what you'd call it, mafia for a long time. Am I wrong about that?
No, mafia is a great word. And, I think you really have an alliance between extremely wealthy people, families, and elites that, as we see from the tone and the text of a lot of these emails and messages, is, they really have disdain for everyone else. Even to the point of not just, the elitist attitude of we're wealthier and more powerful, but, the Talmudic attitude that they have a better soul, a higher consciousness, a nefesh, to use the Hebrew term, that is lacking in a lot of the commoners or the cattle soul. And that, in their perspective, gives a kind of a validation and a vindication as to how they can engage in this with, from their perspective, divine justification. Mm-hmm. But, in the scriptures, when some of that was tolerated in the Old Testament during a very brutal period, God tolerated that not because of the magic DNA of the Jews or anything like that, but to protect the lineage of the Messiah that would come through the Jews. Once the Messiah came, Christ clarified and explained what was fulfilled and what was no longer necessary in the law. And so the ethic became universalized, right? And Christian ethics is universal. The ethics that we see out of these sort of tribal mindsets, and it's the exact same in Islam, by the way. I know Islam professes to have a kind of universal morality, but Islam is also based on a dual ethic. And both of these systems, whether it's Judaism or Islam, by the way, Islam comes out of Talmudic Judaism. People don't know that, but it does. They both focus on a very tribal and dual ethic where you can have deception, you can have perhaps even assassination, murder for those outside, and then a separate sort of a preference, in-group preference for those in the in-group. And that's exactly what we see in many of these emails where he's bragging that it's the Jews versus the white Christians. It's, it's us versus them. We're winning right now. We are in total control. And that's just the reality of how they see it. They see Western civilization, Christianity, all of that, and including Rome and the papacy, as something to be taken over and subverted and turned to and into the entity that promotes the interests of their bloodline, their esoteric occult stuff. That's another thing that's come up. That's why Mormonism was relevant here. And this please send pints of Mormon blood. We're studying the Mormons have a giant DNA library, and so I think Epstein was interested in that. Of course, Mormonism has a longtime connection with the CIA. This is very well known. Many Mormon missionaries have been recruited by the CIA. So all of that also makes perfect sense too. Why Epstein would have an intense interest in DNA, genetics, and bloodlines, not just from Talmudic Judaism, but also from the perspective of transhumanism and living forever. And because these people are Luciferian, satanic, nihilistic, or atheist, all the above, for them, the desire is to, expand and extend this life because that's all they think they have. So they've got to figure out how to perfect what's lacking. And one of the emails even mentioned the occult term, the great work. We're going to continue on the great work. That's an alchemical hermetic term about perfecting what is lacking in creation through technology. And so, again, Bond level villain stuff. If you remember in Moonraker, Hugo Drax, the Bond villain, wants to depopulate the earth and reseed humanity as a kind of new Adam with his bloodline. And this is exactly what we have, Epstein being involved in, presumably with the Zorro Ranch stuff.
I mean, that's the thing. Talk about Bond villainy. This email that came out about Davos replacing the UN, and it's a communication between Jeffrey Epstein and the CEO of the World Economic Forum, which of course is the spiritual hub of all of this, right? As you're talking about wanting to live forever and merging, nature with machines and making up for the shortcomings of nature with technology. I mean, that's the mindset of Yuval Noah Harari and all of the bigwigs at World Economic Forum. So it's no surprise that this mindset is informing all of them. And then but the way that he phrases this, where they say, Davos can easily replace the UN, cyber, crypto, genetics, international coordination, like my stint at Trilateral. Issues now need to deal with the distributed trust and internet fallout. Somebody says, Borge responds, the CEO of World Economic Forum, exactly, we need a new global architecture. World Economic Forum, Davos, is uniquely positioned, public and private. And Epstein responds, global architects first. So, I mean, you talk about taking over the world. I mean, that's what they're talking about doing. They're saying our little industrial, neo-fascistic, half private, half public cabal will run the world. We already have the infrastructure for it. Isn't that convenient?
Yeah, and remember too that the clip that Mike Benz played was very insightful because it's the discussion between Epstein and Ehud Barak, the former prime minister of Israel, discussing how to target Peter Thiel, how to get Peter Thiel on board, and how to make that another arm or tentacle of their octopus. The octopus and its tentacles is a great way to think of this because it's not just tech, it's not just finance, it's not just academia or the celebrity sphere. It's all of the spheres that you think of and really getting an edge, not just in the intel, but also gaming the markets and blackmailing these high-level Silicon Valley elite people. So that was a very, very insightful explanation where you have, or insight where you have basically Epstein saying, okay, look, here's what we're going to do to get you inside of Palantir through me targeting Peter Thiel, getting him on board. And that's one example. And presumably that's how it all goes, right? So in other words, he's an elite fixer. He's a consultant. He's a PhD in organized crime. And that's exactly what all of these emails show 1,000 times over. And every single minute when I open up Twitter, it's some brand new mind-blowing thing that, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, one of these would have been 1 or 2 weeks of news cycle.
Seriously.
Now it's every minute.
This one I hadn't even seen yet. I mean, speak of the devil, you're exactly right. I mean, every time I open up X, I see stuff like this. Newly released documents in the Epstein case alleges Mette Marit, the crown princess of Norway, was pregnant by Epstein. I hadn't even seen that one yet. Well,
I covered that on the first night.
Do you have any insight into why Norway is such a hot spot for this? The other thing that came out was that the Queen of Norway, I think it was, asked Epstein for like parenting advice, and
advice. Yeah, she asked for. She said, "Hey, what do I? Is it appropriate to show this or that to my young son?
Yeah.
And how do I groom him into sexual? In other words, it's like a grooming sexuality email. So
and now that son is on trial for raping four women.
For rape, yeah. So he's on trial for rape cases, and what we get from that is that not only that was that presumably she was grooming him to be a future psychopathic leader. That's a pattern that even Quigley talked about at the end of Tragedy and Hope. He says, one of the things that the elite do that the rest of the population doesn't do and doesn't understand is that they send their children off to elite boarding schools and they teach them basic psychopathy. He doesn't come out and say that, but it basically says that they don't have connection, so that they're deprived intentionally of motherly and parental connection so that they develop psychopathy so that they can be a kind of an Emmanuel Macron type person who can be controlled through the vices. So that's very important. So when you basically corrupt these people, you control them through vices, and you also have to degrade the people further and further to go higher up their ladder. As Alex has always talked about, these emails vindicate that to go higher and higher up in the ladder of success in this world through this system requires more and more degrading acts to become billionaire, trillionaire level stuff, right? So we also get the idea that people are put into and groomed in these positions, particularly the children of these people and the elites and the royals. And I would say in the case of Prince, whatever her name is, of Denmark and others, there was another one where they were offering the princess, I think her name is Sophia, they were offering her to Jeffrey, saying, hey, Jeff, here's Sophia, the princess daughter. Would you like her? Can you groom her? It's crazy. So it's almost like they all sort of looked up to, he was like in awe, and even perhaps wanted to be impregnated by him, thinking that this would be a pathway into, to power, to maintaining power. So yeah, it's not just Norway, it's also Denmark. It's also, I think it's Sophia of Denmark they were trying to get Epstein to take her on. And remember that email that we mentioned at the very beginning, it was talking about spotting people that are potential recruits for the stages of the process. It's just called the process. We don't know exactly what process it is, but sounds like a kind of grooming into becoming a sex operative.
Gosh, it is just unbelievably creepy, but it's not speculation anymore. I mean, this is, we now have them describing what they do. So it's like we really have to face this and not just go, ooh, that'd be weird if that was true. No, this is real and this is how it works. And now you really can't deny it. So it's kind of time to come to terms with it. And just going back to about Palantir, because you mentioned, he's talking to Ehud Barak, and this was, neither one of them knew how to spell Palantir. They'd never heard of Peter Thiel. I mean, this was before he was anybody. So that's informative, right? It was in 2013 that phone call was made. It was in 2014 that Palantir got its first major contracts with the Israeli government. And ever since then has been building and building to the point now, published yesterday, Glenn Greenwald says, congratulations to Palantir for their revenue record $1.41 billion quarter, saying not only for its centralizing and radically strengthened domestic surveillance state under its control, and not only for rapidly expanding the powers of the U.S. security state to new dystopian levels, but also getting endless contracts from the U.S. government. So not a surprise that the road was paved for them. That's why it's like, it's not like Palantir is this amazing company that everybody was like clamoring to buy their product. They were put in position. They're, okay, you get the contract now. Congratulations, you're a $1 billion company. I mean, this is the way that it all works, and it's all just completely manipulated. I mean, is anything in our world legitimate anymore? And where do we go from here, I guess, is my question. Like, now that we know all of this, what do we do?
We have stories as well of wild dinners that Epstein had with Zuckerberg. We have masses of information passing allegedly from Epstein from Facebook to Israel. So that's another angle of it that not many people are talking about. We also have the mention of pandemic simulations.
Right. With Bill Gates.
A 2017, Yeah.
With Bill Gates,
2017 email where he sends a message that includes Bill Gates, and he says, hey, here's all this information on bioweapon stuff. And by the way, here's how to run and look into various pandemic simulations. And then somebody found another one from 2015 even. So it's going back even further, as well as Epstein talking about certain biolabs and animal torture and testing labs in the Ukraine. That's pretty wild too, because remember, Epstein ends up flying to Ukraine 1 month before Zelensky becomes president. And remember the email that he has with Ariana de Rothschild saying, hey, well, we can actually profit from this chaos in Ukraine. Then we have the text messages where Zelensky's saying, hey, I need Epstein to help me out. Zelensky says, Putin thinks Israel's running me. I need Epstein's help. So again, high-level consultant fixer. He shows up right before before Zelensky wins. And yeah, I mean, it's just so there's so much going on. We also have a vindication, by the way, of my buddy Mark Hackard. He actually translated an old KGB colonel's assessment during the Cold War of Robert Maxwell. And this one's relevant because in the KGB's assessment of Maxwell, they believed he was playing both sides.
Right.
And in the Epstein email about Maxwell, somebody says, hey, what was the deal with Robert Maxwell being killed by the Mossad? And Epstein says, well, the real story is that he actually appointed himself as the Israeli Mossad ambassador to the Soviets and was playing both sides. And he tried to extort Mossad for 400 million pounds, and that's why they got rid of him. So that basically vindicates that essay that we shared as well. That was kind of a contentious, debated theory for so long. But I mean, again, I could keep going, but
well, and that I think is important too, because again, it's people that are just looking into this might think like, okay, he worked for Mossad. That means everything he did was Mossad ordered, but like, no, you can turn against them. They'll liquidate you. They'll kill you. You can be working as a double agent. I mean, all of this is vague, right? I mean, that's the nature of
well, that was Maxwell, right? I mean, I think that in the case of Epstein, he mainly worked for the Israeli interests, but I also think he would help out or I mean, this is an international clique that's kind of even above a single nation state. I mean, he was interested. He was meeting with one of the emails that was pretty wild was he was going to meet with the heads of state. He had it planned out, and it was like 15 different heads of nations that he had scheduled to meet with. And then it was the U.S. State Department or Department, I think it was the State Department, had approved these meetings for Jeffrey Epstein. So in other words, he was working at a very high level for multiple governments and people, but ultimately it definitely serves, for the most part, probably the Israeli interests.
Right. But of course, you know, to ingratiate yourself, you might do favors for another interest. It doesn't mean you're on their side, but you're, you know, contributing to them. I think that's exactly right. Now, we don't have to waste time by showing the video, but I guess we can. Let's go to clip 49 here. We'll do it for a couple seconds. So I want to get your response to this, and just as I'm in frustration, I'm just baffled at the way Trump is responding to this. And I want to play this for a few seconds to get Jay's response on the other side. Here's Trump yesterday when he's asked about Jeffrey Epstein.
And no, he made a statement about me and Jeffrey Epstein. I have nothing to do with that. I have nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein. And in fact, if you look at the DOJ, they announced, they released 3 million pages. It's like this is all they're supposed to be doing. And frankly, the DOJ, I think, should just say, we have other things to do, because that whole thing has turned out, I mean, other than Bill Clinton and, Bill Gates and lots of people that there are a lot of questions about it, but nothing on me.
There it is. He basically says, the DOJ's got better things to worry about. And it's like, does he not know? Does he not know what has been exposed here? It's like he thinks that it's an attack on him, so he's like, refusing to acknowledge it. It's like, dude, all of your enemies are exposed here, and you don't even know it. What do you think is happening with Trump right now?
It's hard to say. I've not seen a specific piece of data yet that confirms that there's an involvement at that level with him. I mean, and like Alex says, like, I'm open to being corrected, or if there's something. I know there was photos that were going around. Some of those were AI, and those obviously I think were debunkable pretty easily. You can see multiple extra fingers that people had. So right. I think it's important too to not immediately jump on a lot of these without kind of looking and checking. So be sure and look at the files to make sure, that a lot of these are actually there. That photo, for example, that was going around was a fake. That was a fake one of Trump. That one wasn't in the archives or the files. So
right.
But I mean, you can find the ones where it's like Epstein has a contract with the Rothschild Group for $25 million. I mean, that stuff's real. Epstein's flying for 3 decades almost CIA planes. Why is he flying CIA planes for 3 decades?
Or why is Marco Rubio being credited as being the original funder of the dossier for Russiagate? Like, this is the thing. I think the people around Trump are going, this Epstein stuff, it's all about attacking you, and really you're the. And it's funny to me because he's so concerned about his image that he seems to be only concerned about the wolf thing, and he's like, oh, I'm not being accused, am I? And I'm innocent. And it's like, if he was less concerned about protecting his image and just looked at the Epstein files, then he could round up this cabal of criminals, and his image would be of the savior of the republic, and he could be a hero. But it's like he's so intent on protecting his image that he's missing the bigger picture that would actually help his image rise. I mean, I had the story today. His poll numbers are down across the board. Every single topic people polled about Trump, and he's failing and disappointing everybody. And it's like, dude, that's the problem. It's not because Michael Wolff is lying about you. It's because you're so concerned about your image that your image is being destroyed. Does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I think it's to people in the establishment who still are focused largely on establishment perspectives, and Trump was always looking at boomer news to see what the boomers are saying, and it's like there's millions and billions of views right now on Twitter. How many people are getting the information and the news from the mainstream media, which is not really even talking about this, except for people trying to run cover and run point for this stuff, like Ben Shapiro saying, oh, it's all rumors, there's nothing there, don't look at it. So it's a huge mistake to not hone in on this. But there was another element too, and I'm trying to change the subject, but I didn't want to forget that over the years, a lot of the new atheists who are these supposedly rabid rationalists, well, it turns out they're all also very close to and flying on the Epstein flights many, many times. Why are all the new atheists so closely connected to this international crime figure? Interesting question.
That's a very good question. And it actually, I just thought of this. I mean, it makes sense that Ghislaine Maxwell was like head of Reddit. And I mean, during the rise of the new atheism movement, which really did do severe damage to, faith in America, especially because you had so many people pushing this material of supposedly very intelligent people debunking Christianity, and you really didn't have a big push back against that. And a lot of that happened on Reddit. I mean, clearly that had a lot of elements of a manipulated narrative.
It does. I've suspected for a long time that they're not actually atheists, that they worship something else. We also have the Dalai Lama as another one of the figures implicated here, meeting with and being very close to Jeffrey Epstein. Of course, people saw pictures, videos of the Dalai Lama licking young boys on the mouth. So this vindicates, by the way, the declassification that was that's been out for a while, that the Free Tibet program was also a CIA-run program, and that's why the Dalai Lama would be an asset. We have a lot of Hollywood people, too. We can't forget mentions of bringing Jane Fonda, Robert De Niro to various events. They're described as the useful goyim at the events. We have Jay-Z seems to be closely associated to some degree here, and Jay-Z curiously removed everything from his Instagram. So I'm not sure why he would have done that.
And fled the country, apparently. I thought it was a joke, but then I think it was The Independent reported that he'd actually fled the country.
Mm-hmm. And let's not forget, too, that there are many models. There was a famous Russian model, Ruslana Korshinova, who went to Epstein's Island when she was 18, and then 2 years later, she jumped out of her ninth floor apartment. So again, that's not hard to understand now that we have the email saying you have permission to kill. Did you kill her? Blah, blah, blah. All these emails referring to assassinations. We have Leonardo DiCaprio, Epstein saying to Peter Mandelson, who I heard, I don't know if this is true, but I heard that he stepped down too. So we have multiple people, by the way, stepping down, like heads of state, UN people stepping down. And Epstein sends an email to Peter Mandelson and says, hey, our good buddy Leonardo DiCaprio is looking for endorsements in other countries. Can you help us set that up? So again, I mean, he's just literally like a fixer, networker, organized crime consultant for everybody. It's so crazy.
Well, and it seems like it doesn't make any sense, but then, because what Jeffrey Epstein was, he was a Bond villain, but he was more like James Bond for the bad guys, right? I mean, he was an agent. He was a secret agent. And, when Bond goes to play poker with Lashif, he's an industrial magnate. But when he goes to do something else, he's playing a different role. He's just a spy, or like a mobster. Tony Soprano, what is he, a construction guy, or is he a pornography guy, or is he this? Well, he does a little bit of everything. He's a connector.
Sanitation. Take care of the bodies. A good little sanitation.
Yeah,
take the bodies. Take the trash out.
Yeah, and you become a millionaire that way, of course, right? It's like, no, his day job was shaking people down. His day job was putting people with stuff in connection with people that wanted to steal that stuff. I mean, that's what these people do. So it's just amazing. It is beyond vindication for us here at InfoWars, but for you as well, of course. What's next for you, Jay, and how can people support you, and how can they find the book?
Well, you can go to my YouTube channel where I've been live streaming this for 4 days straight. I just did a big interview with Dasha Nekrasova, the actress and artist producer, and she did a movie a while back. They didn't get a lot of attention. It was called The Scary of 61st. And the movie is actually kind of about the Epstein stuff. And she did that movie, I think, in 2019, 2020. It has a lot of really deep esoteric occult stuff in it, and everybody sort of poo-pooed it at the time, but she's kind of been vindicated. So I just did an interview with her. You can check that out. You can also get my books at jaysanalysis.com in the shop. And it's always signed copies if you get the book from me.
jaysanalysis.com. Thank you for being with us.